The Huntsville unit does not announce arrivals. There is no declaration that a man has crossed an invisible line between waiting and finality. The gates close behind the transport vehicle the same way they close for supply trucks and staff cars. Steel slides into place. Locks engage. Radios crackle briefly, then fall quiet again. Inside, the routine resumes. But for the inmates stepping off the vehicle in restraints, the air feels different. Even those who have never been to Huntsville before often know its reputation. The building itself carries decades of history, not just in paperwork and court rulings, but in stories told quietly among inmates across the Texas prison system. Stories about last meals, about final words, about the small execution chamber tucked inside a larger complex that, from the outside, looks almost ordinary. The inmate is processed in. Identification verified. Documentation confirmed again. There are always multiple confirmations. In a system built on legality, redundancy is a safeguard. He is led to a cell in a section reserved for those with scheduled execution dates. These cells are not dramatically different from others in high-security units, but the meaning attached to them is heavy. Every person housed nearby is on a similar path, though not always on the same timeline. Time works strangely here. Hours can feel compressed. Days can feel stretched thin. Some men count the hours. Others deliberately avoid counting at all. Correctional officers maintain professionalism. That is the expectation. Many have done this before. Some have done it dozens of times. A few have done it so often that the procedures feel almost muscle memory. Keys turn. Logs are updated. Meals are delivered. Yet even among experienced staff, there is often an unspoken understanding. This placement is different from any other housing assignment in the prison. The chaplain usually becomes one of the first regular visitors. Not every inmate is religious, but many request spiritual counsel in these final stages. Conversations range widely. Some talk about forgiveness. Some talk about fear. Some talk about nothing related to faith at all, just memories, families, moments from childhood that resurface after decades behind walls. There are accounts from chaplains who say these talks are less about religion and more about being heard, about letting a person speak when time feels limited, about giving space for reflection. For some inmates, this is when they begin reaching outward. Phone calls, letters, requests for visits. The rules are strict, but accommodations sometimes exist for final contact within policy limits. Families experience their own quiet storm during this period. For relatives of the condemned, the process is emotionally complex. Some have maintained relationships for years. Some grew distant. Some struggle with the weight of loving someone the world has condemned. Travel arrangements are made. Hotels booked. Time off work requested without always explaining why. For the families of victims, this period can bring a different kind of anticipation. Some seek closure. Some attend the execution. Some choose not to. There is no universal reaction to loss, and no single way people carry grief across decades. Outside the prison, advocacy groups may begin organizing. Some oppose the death penalty entirely. Some focus on specific cases. Others advocate for victims' rights. On certain days, small clusters of protesters appear near the prison perimeter, holding signs, speaking to reporters, standing quietly in the Texas heat. But inside the walls, the atmosphere remains controlled, structured, almost subdued. Meals continue on schedule. Security checks happen at set intervals. Medical staff conduct evaluations. Every action is documented. every movement logged. The condemned inmate is observed more closely now, not just for security, but for mental health. The system has a responsibility to ensure competency for execution under legal standards. That brings its own layer of evaluations and procedures. Sleep can become irregular. Some inmates sleep more than usual. Others barely sleep at all. The lights, the sounds, the awareness of time, all of it can press on the mind. Former prison staff have described this stage as one where emotions can shift rapidly. Calm 1 hour, restless the next. There are inmates who become deeply reflective, writing letters, making apologies, recording statements through attorneys. Some express remorse. Some maintain innocence. Some sit somewhere in between, shaped by years of appeals, denials, and legal battles that have defined much of their adult lives. And then there are practical matters. Personal property is reviewed. Certain items may be released to family. Legal representatives coordinate details. The machinery of the state moves forward not with drama, but with paperwork and signatures. Execution day itself is scheduled with precision. Times are set. Witness lists confirmed. Media protocols prepared. The state follows a script refined over decades, designed to minimize unpredictability. The goal is order, predictability, control. Yet unpredictability always exists at the edges. A last-minute appeal can be filed. Courts can issue temporary stays. Phone calls can come in from judges' chambers. There have been cases where executions were halted within hours, sometimes minutes, of the scheduled time. Because of that, the system operates in a strange dual state. Preparing fully while knowing the outcome is not absolutely certain until the final legal avenues close. For the inmate, that uncertainty can be its own burden. Hope can flicker, even if faint. And where there is hope, there is tension. Some officers have said the hardest moments are not the loud ones, but the quiet ones. The conversations that feel ordinary despite the context. Asking an inmate if they want water. Handing over a meal tray. Hearing a thank you in a situation where gratitude feels out of place. Human interactions don't disappear inside a system. They just become more complicated. The final meal often draws public curiosity, but inside the facility it is handled simply. Requests are reviewed. There are limits. Contrary to popular myth, it is not an extravagant feast. It is a meal approved within guidelines, delivered like any other. Some inmates eat, some don't. As the scheduled hour approaches, the witness rooms are prepared. These rooms are separated from the execution chamber by glass. One side for victims' families and their representatives. Another for the inmates' chosen witnesses, often family or spiritual advisors. A media room exists as well, where selected journalists observe and later report. The execution chamber itself is clinical, brightly lit, designed for function, not symbolism. Medical equipment is arranged carefully. Staff assigned to specific roles know their responsibilities clearly. Training precedes every step. This is not improvised. Whatever one thinks of the death penalty, the operational side is structured to be methodical. Outside, the Texas sky does what it always does. Sometimes it's dark. Sometimes streaked with sunset. Sometimes heavy with humidity. Nature does not pause for human systems. When the moment arrives to move the inmate, the process begins with restraints and escort. Officers follow rehearsed positions. Doors open in sequence. Radios confirm movements. There are no dramatic speeches in the hallway. No cinematic tension. Just footsteps and procedure. The inmate may be given a chance for final words in the chamber. Some prepare statements. Some speak to victims' families. Some address loved ones. Some decline to speak at all. Those words, when spoken, often travel far beyond the walls through news reports and documentaries. They become part of the public record, analyzed and debated by people who never step inside the facility. And then, at a certain point, the process continues, as prescribed by law. Time of death is recorded. Documentation is completed. Notifications are made. The system closes the file the way systems do with records, signatures, and confirmations. But for everyone touched by the case, families, officers, lawyers, witnesses, the experience does not end as neatly as a document. Some carry it quietly. Some speak about it years later. Some never speak about it at all. The secrecy people often imagine around death row operations is not always about hiding something dramatic. Often it is about maintaining order, privacy, and security in a process that is already emotionally charged. The less spectacle, the smoother the function. Yet the mystery remains for the public because access is limited. Prisons are closed environments by nature. Information is filtered through official channels, legal constraints, and ethical considerations. And so much of what the world knows comes from fragments, interviews, court documents, rare first-hand accounts, investigative journalism, and the testimonies of those who once worked inside. What emerges is not a story of theatrics, but of systems. A system balancing law, punishment, procedure, and humanity in ways that provoke ongoing debate across America and beyond. Some see it as justice. Some see it as irreversible punishment. Some see it as a relic of another era. But inside Texas, along quiet highways between Livingston and Huntsville, the physical routes remain the same. The buses still travel at night. The paperwork still moves across desks. The gates still open and close with the same metallic certainty. And for most people driving those highways, it is just another stretch of Texas road under a wide sky. They pass by without knowing how many last journeys have traveled beside them, and the journeys that begin in silence and end in a room the public rarely sees. Yet the questions surrounding those journeys echo far beyond the prison walls, into courtrooms, legislatures, dinner table debates, and the conscience of a nation still deciding how it defines justice.
Morning inside the Huntsville unit arrives without sunrise. The light that fills the corridor is fluorescent, steady, indifferent to the hour. It does not warm. It does not soften. It simply exists, humming faintly above rows of steel doors. For the men housed here with execution dates, morning is less a beginning and more a marker, another piece of time accounted for. The sounds are predictable: keys, footsteps, the low murmur of officers exchanging shift updates. Somewhere farther down, a door closing with a heavy final tone that reverberates through the tire. Predictability is intentional. Prisons rely on routine the way hospitals rely on sterilization. It keeps order. It reduces variables. It gives structure to environments where emotions could otherwise tilt the balance. But routine does not erase awareness. An inmate awaiting execution often becomes hyper-aware of time, the way footsteps approach and fade, the schedule of meals, the intervals between checks. Some begin to measure the day in fragments, from breakfast to noon count, from noon count to evening, from evening to lights out. Even though lights never fully disappear, the concept of night still exists in the mind. Legal teams remain active in the background. Appeals do not always end until the very last hours. Attorneys may be drafting motions, contacting courts, coordinating with advocates. Phones ring in offices miles away while, inside the prison, the man at the center of those calls sits in a concrete cell listening to the air system cycle on and off. The distance between legal argument and lived reality can feel enormous. Some inmates follow every development closely. They ask their lawyers detailed questions. They track dates, rulings, possibilities. Others step back from it, emotionally or mentally. After years, sometimes decades of appeals, the process can feel like an ocean of paperwork that never quite reaches shore. The chaplain's visits often grow longer as the date approaches, not always daily, but frequent. These conversations can drift through philosophy, memory, fear, hope, or simple storytelling. A man might talk about a childhood fishing trip, about a sibling he hasn't seen in years, about a song he once liked on the radio before prison life replaced ordinary routines. Memory becomes a place people revisit when the future feels narrow. Officers notice these shifts even if they do not comment on them. Many develop a professional stillness, a calm presence that neither invites nor rejects conversation. They are trained to maintain boundaries, yet they are also human, and humans observe. Some officers later say the waiting period is heavier than the moment itself. Because waiting stretches, it allows reflection. It creates space where reality settles in. Outside the facility, life continues at full speed. Traffic moves through Huntsville. Students attend classes at Sam Houston State University. People shop for groceries, go to work, plan weekends. The prison sits within the town, but it is also separate from it, like a world running on parallel tracks. Locals grow accustomed to the presence of the Walls unit. For many, it is simply part of the town's identity. Generations have worked there. Stories pass quietly between families, often in broad strokes rather than specifics. On certain days, especially when an execution is scheduled, small groups gather outside the perimeter. Some hold candles, some hold signs, some pray, some protest. Their voices rarely reach inside the walls, but their presence marks the event in the outside world. Media outlets prepare in their own way. Reporters review case histories. Producers schedule segments. Fact sheets are updated. The story becomes a timeline for viewers. Crime, trial, appeals, date. Years are compressed into minutes of airtime. But inside the facility, time refuses to compress. It moves second by second. For the condemned, communication with family becomes precious. Calls are monitored and time-limited, but they carry weight. A few minutes can hold decades of unspoken emotion. Some families speak often, others struggle to find words. There are relationships strained by distance, by circumstance, by the nature of the crime itself. Love and accountability coexist in complicated ways. A mother may still see her child even when the world sees a criminal. A sibling may carry both anger and loyalty. A child may know their parent only through visits and phone calls filtered by prison rules. These human connections do not fit neatly into legal categories. Meanwhile, the institutional process continues with calm precision, health checks, documentation reviews, coordination between departments. Every step must align with policy. The system is designed to leave little to improvisation. There is also the question of mental readiness. Courts have ruled that inmates must be mentally competent to understand their execution and the reason for it. That means evaluations can occur. Psychologists may be involved. Observations are recorded. This adds another layer to an already complex process, the intersection of law, medicine, and ethics. Some days pass quietly, others carry an undercurrent of tension, especially if legal filings are pending. A single court decision miles away can change the course of everything. Stays have happened before. Last-minute rulings are not fiction. They are part of the legal landscape. Because of this, preparation always exists alongside uncertainty. In the housing area, interactions between inmates are limited, but not non-existent. Voices travel, men call out to each other. Sometimes they offer encouragement. Sometimes they share philosophical reflections. On death row, many understand the weight of the path because they walk versions of it themselves. There can be a sense of somber solidarity, not friendship in the usual sense, but recognition. Recognition that each man is living inside a countdown shaped by courts and calendars. As the final days approach, personal reflection often deepens. Some inmates write final statements or letters. These may go to family, lawyers, or sometimes victims' families. Not all are delivered, not all are accepted, but the act of writing can matter to the person holding the pen. It is a way of placing thoughts somewhere outside the mind. Food trays still arrive on schedule. Laundry still rotates. Security rounds still happen. The normal operations of a prison do not stop for one case. The system is too large for that, and yet, in subtle ways, attention narrows. Supervisors review assignments. Teams confirm roles. Communication lines are tested. It is not theatrical. It is procedural. Like a checklist before a flight, for some staff, experience brings emotional distance. For others, each case feels distinct. Personal beliefs about the death penalty vary widely among correctional staff, just as they do in the general public. But on duty, personal views step behind professional responsibility. That compartmentalization becomes a survival skill. Even so, there are moments that break through. A quiet thank you, a final handshake with a chaplain, a family member's voice cracking over a phone line. These moments remind everyone involved that the process, however structured, involves real lives. Even the town's rhythms can subtly reflect the day. On execution days, certain roads near the unit see more media vehicles. Satellite trucks sometimes park in designated areas. Local residents notice, even if they don't engage. The event exists in layers: public awareness outside, controlled procedure inside. And through it all, the man at the center of it experiences something no one else can fully share: the personal awareness of a date approaching that cannot be casually postponed. Some face it with visible calm, some with anxiety, some with a mixture that shifts hour to hour. Humans are not static, especially under pressure. There are stories of inmates who found unexpected peace in their final days. Others wrestled intensely with regret or fear. No single narrative fits all. Each case carries its own emotional landscape shaped by personality, belief, history, and circumstance. The public often sees death penalty cases in black and white, guilt and punishment, crime and consequence. But inside the walls, the emotional reality tends to be more textured. Not simpler, not necessarily sympathetic, just human in its complexity. And complexity does not erase accountability, it simply coexists with it. As another evening settles over Huntsville, the sky turning shades of orange and gray beyond the high walls, the prison continues its steady rhythm. Officers change shifts, paperwork moves across desks. Phones ring in administrative offices. Somewhere in the building, a man sits in a cell thinking about the past or the present, or perhaps trying not to think at all. Time continues forward. It always does. And the system, built on schedules and statutes, moves with it, step by step, signature by signature, mile by mile, toward a moment that carries legal weight, moral debate, and human consequence all at once. The story does not pause here. It keeps moving, like the quiet highways between Livingston and Huntsville, like the buses that travel them at night, like the questions that follow long after the gates close. And those questions about justice, punishment, mercy, and finality do not stay inside prison walls. They travel outward, into courts, into communities, into the conscience of a society still wrestling with what justice should look like at its most severe edge.
The day before an execution has a peculiar stillness to it. Not silence prisons are universally silent, but a different texture of sound. Conversations are shorter. Movements feel more deliberate. yet noble signals it, yet the awareness settles it. For the inmate, the timeline is no longer abstract. It is printed, scheduled, confirmed, barring outward intervention. The sequence ahead is known. That knowledge concept behavior in very different ways. Some men grow quicker, some talk more than usual. Some focus intensely on small routines folding a blanket neatly, organizing papers. Rereading letter. Control over small things can matter when control over big things is gone. Lawyers remain active until the end. Motions can still be filled, can still murder. In some cases, legal terms work through the nickel, correcting court responses, refreshing inboxes, waiting for a ruling that could change everything. Hope, even if statistically slim, has a powerful presence in capital cases. Inside the prison, updates move through official channels. Administrators stay informed if stay is granted. Word travels faster. Key appeals are redundant. The schedule holds. When certainty leaves wake beside certainty. The inmate may receive visits the day before. There's a relatively regulated, but actually immense emotional weight. Family members sometimes travel long distances for these final moments across a barrier, speaking through phones, saying if other through reinforced blood, no physical contact, no embedded. Just voices and touches separated the security and circumstances. What do people say in those moments? There is no script. Some talk about loving, some about memories. Some try to be strong for the other person. Some agree, some cannot find words at all. For families, these visits can feel surreal. The setting is sterile, the time limited, the awareness heavy. Walking back out of the facility afterward can feel like laughing a chapter unfinished. The chaplain often plays a steady role during this period. Spiritual support if requested. A calm presence. Someone to listen. Not every conversation is religious. Sometimes it is about fear of the unknown. Sometimes it is about reconciliation with the past. There are inmates who ask that philosophical questions in Tesore. About meaning. About forgiveness. About whether a life can be measured and maybe it was acted. These questions do not always have answers that satisfy, but asking them can be part of how a person processes their reality. Correctional officers continue their duty. Professionalism is key. Procedures exist for a reason to maintain order, to ensure legality, to keep the process structured. Women officers serve their role as part of the justice system as function, not as personal judgment. Yet even within strict professionalism, empathy can quickly exist. A respectful tone, a clear explanation of a procedure, small courtesies that cause no train but can resonate in a heavy moment. As evening approaches, the outside world may begin to focus more closely. News outlets confirm times. Advocacy groups prepare statements. Social media discussions intensify. Supporters and opponents of the death penalty debate virtually, often using the case as a symbol for broader arguments. Truth inside the prison, symbolism gives way to logistica. Witness lists are finalized. These typically include representatives for the victim's family, the inmate exclusion witnesses, and selected media. Each group has its own waiting area, its own process, its own emotional landscape. Victims' families carry their own long journey into that room. Some say closer, some say to say justice carried out. Some are unsure what they will feel, and only though they need to be present. Grief does not follow ultimatable, even when the legal system does. On the inmate essay. Witnesses may include family, a spiritual advisor, sometimes a close friend. For them, the experience can be deeply personal, layered with years of complicated emotion. The neck continues forward. The inmate is typically moved to a holding area closer to the execution chamber as the scheduled 10 years. This is procedural. It reduces last-minute movement and aligns with protocol. The environment is controlled, monitored, calm. There is often a final opportunity for a meal earlier in the day. A popular culture has turned this into a spectacle, but inside the system it is straightforward. Recluses waiting guidelines. Nothing excessive, sometimes meaningful, sometimes simple, some inmates act normally, some barely touch the food. As the hour approaches, their pace becomes more exciting. The millennials are followed closely. Each step has a pledge. Each role is definite. The system does not rush, but it does not wander either. The inmate may be offered the chance to make a final statement recorded as part of the official record. Some prepare carefully. Some step from the heart in the moment. Some decline entirely, case order. When spoken, often ripple far beyond the chamber. They are quoted in articles, discussed by commentators, remembered by families. Final words carry a symbolic weight, because they are the definition. The last public expression from a person. Meanwhile, the witnesses are escorted to their respective rooms. The walk there can fail long evaluate is the staff explain roulette, where to stand, what to expect, when to leave. The tone is respectful. Neutral, the execution chamber itself is clinical. Bracket editing, medical equipment, strappers. Monitors, it is designed for function. Not drama, those who have described it often not how ordinary it looks compared to the extraordinary gravity of its purpose. When they met interest, there is a sequence of action. As deliberate, staff trained for these roles carry them out methodically. There is no improvisation here. Training and protocol guide every motion. If they met choices to spare, this is when final words are said. Some teams directed at victims' families. Some teams at their own loved honest. Some teams at the world in general. Emotions in the witness room can varieties. Stillness, good focus. Then the procedure continues according to law and policy. Team of death is later declared by a medical professional. The official record is completed. The legal sentence is fulfilled in the eyes of the state, but the emotional and moral dimensions do not end with a team's tongue. Witnesses left carrying their own reaction. Some feel closer, some feel unresolved, some feel a mixture that is hard to name. There is no single response that defines human reaction to such a moment. Staff complete their duties and transitions. For them, the workday eventually ended. They go home, some decompress easily. Others carry the weight quickly. Institutions often provide support resources. But personal processing varies widely. Outside, statements are released. Journalists report. Accusers respond. The case enters history, becoming on a more data point in the long record of capital punishment in Texas. Yet each case is also singular. Each involves a unique set of people, circumstances, victims, families, legal arguments. Dan moral question. Reducing it to a number never captures the full picture. Texas remains at the center of the American death penalty conversation, partly because of volume and history. The state is legal from a war, political climate, and judicial processes have shaped how capital punishment functions there. Supporters argue it delivers justice and deterrence. Opponents argue it is irreversible error and moral code. The debate stretches far beyond unknown in matter one micro. It reaches into philosophy, law, criminology, and public opinion. It touches on questions of fairness, representation, evidence standard, and the role of government in administering the ultimate punishment. Meanwhile, the physical pledges remain. Polanski, Kunstfilm, the equals between them. Real locations where these abstract debates become level reality for real people. And perhaps that is why the subject continues to hold public attention. Because it sits at the intersection of law and humanity, order and emotion, justice and mercy. Long after it has gone 2 days, the issues remain in families who move forward carrying memory in communities practices and debating a legal system that continues to evolve, and in a society still examining what justice means at its most final boundary. This story does not end at the chamber door. It continues in conversations, reforms, elections, church rulings, and personal belief. It continues wherever people ask hard questions about punishment and responsibility. And as long as those questions exist, they could journeys between prisons. The paperwork, the procedures, and the human stories inside them will remain part of a larger narrative on it that America is still writing.
In the days after an execution, the prison does something that might seem surprising to people on the outside. It returns to normal almost immediately. Schedules remain, shifts rotate. New intakes arrive in other units, paperwork flows. The institution cannot pause for reflection every time a sentence is carried out, or it would cease to function. Prisons are built on continuity, but normal does not mean unchanged. For those directly involved, there is often a quiet after effect. Some staff take a day off if their schedule allows. Some talk very little about it. Others rely on routine as a way to settle their thoughts. In professions that deal regularly with life's hardest edges, corrections, medicine, emergency response, compartmentalization becomes a learned skill. It is not that people don't feel, it is that the job requires feeling to be managed. Beyond the walls, the story takes on a different life. News reports circulate for a cycle, sometimes a day, sometimes longer if the case was high profile. Commentators frame the narrative in different ways depending on perspective. Advocates issue statements, social media debates surge, then slowly give way to the next headline. But for the families on both sides, there is no quick shift to the next story. For victims' families, the execution can bring a sense of resolution, or it can reopen grief. Many have said closure is not as simple as a single event. Loss reshapes a life permanently. A legal outcome cannot rewind time. It can only mark a point in the long journey of coping. For the families of the executed, the aftermath can be isolating. Grief mixed with stigma is a complicated burden. They mourn a person while knowing the pain associated with that person's actions. Their sorrow rarely fits into public narratives. It exists quietly in private spaces. These parallel griefs rarely meet, but they coexist in the same story. And then there is the broader public, people who follow cases from a distance, who hold opinions shaped by values, beliefs, and experiences. Some see capital punishment as a necessary tool of justice reserved for the most severe crimes. Others see it as an irreversible penalty in a system run by imperfect humans. Both sides often speak from deeply held convictions. Over the years, the national conversation around the death penalty has shifted and evolved. Court rulings have refined who can be eligible. Standards for evidence and appeals have changed. Some states have paused or ended executions altogether. Others, like Texas, have continued to use the sentence within their legal framework. This evolution reflects something fundamental about law in a democracy. It is not static. It responds to court decisions, legislation, public opinion, and new understandings of psychology, forensics, and human rights. Inside Texas, the system remains structured and procedural. The routes between facilities remain the same. The units stand where they have stood for years, but the policies governing them are shaped by ongoing debate and review. Even the people working inside the system know that the landscape can change. New rulings alter protocol. New leadership can shift emphasis. Training evolves. Oversight expands or contracts with policy. The idea of a system being both stable and changing at the same time may seem contradictory, but that is often how institutions function. The buildings stay, the rules adapt. For those who study criminal justice, Texas is frequently a focal point. Not only because of the number of executions historically, but because it offers a concentrated look at how capital punishment operates in practice, the logistics, the legal pathways, the administrative design. It is one thing to debate the death penalty in theory. It is another to examine the machinery that makes it real, the transport schedules, the staffing plans, the legal filings, the witness coordination, the documentation that tracks every step. Behind every headline is a framework built on policy manuals and state law, and behind that framework are people. People who enforce the law, people who challenge it, people who live with its consequences. One of the least visible truths about the death penalty system is that it relies heavily on ordinary tasks performed consistently, filing forms correctly, logging times accurately, following chain of command, ensuring procedures are lawful. The gravity of the outcome rests on the reliability of these small actions. The public often imagines dramatic moments, but the reality is frequently administrative. Yet within administration lies moral weight. That weight is why the topic persists in public consciousness. It touches on the deepest questions a society can ask itself. What is justice? What is proportional punishment? Can a system created by humans ever be perfect enough to administer irreversible penalties? What role should mercy play in law? These questions do not have universal answers, and perhaps they never will. Different cultures, eras, and communities answer them differently. Back in Huntsville, life continues as it always has. The town's streets fill with daily activity. Students attend lectures. Families gather for dinner. The prison remains part of the landscape, but not the center of most residents' daily thoughts. And yet, every so often, the outside world looks toward those walls again. A scheduled date, a notable case, a renewed debate. The cycle repeats, but never identically. Each case adds another layer to the national memory, another reference point in legal arguments, another story in the long timeline of American criminal justice. If you were to drive the highways between Livingston and Huntsville late at night, you might see state vehicles moving steadily under the wide Texas sky. Most would be routine transports, supply runs, ordinary operations that keep a vast correctional system functioning. You would not know which trips carry history inside them. That is part of the nature of this system. Much of it happens quietly, away from public view, recorded in logs more often than in headlines. And perhaps that quietness is what makes the subject linger in the mind. The contrast between the enormity of the outcome and the calmness of the process. Between the public debate and the private experiences. Between law as written and law as lived. In the end, the story of Texas death row transfers is not just about movement between prisons. It is about the journey through a legal and moral landscape that a society has constructed over generations. A landscape shaped by fear, accountability, politics, empathy, and the pursuit of order. It is about how a state carries out its most serious sentences. How people inside that system navigate their roles. How families endure long arcs of pain and hope. How a nation continues to question itself. There are no easy endings here. No cinematic resolution where all sides feel satisfied. Real life rarely offers that. What it offers, instead, is ongoing reflection. As laws evolve and conversations continue, the future of capital punishment in America remains a subject of scrutiny and debate. Some believe its use will narrow further, others believe it will remain for the most extreme cases. Time, courts, and public will shape that path. But regardless of where the debate leads, the human stories behind these processes will always matter. Because they remind us that justice systems do not operate in theory alone. They operate in real places, affecting real lives. And sometimes, they move quietly down a dark highway long after midnight, carrying questions that do not fit neatly into any one answer. The gates open, the gates close, the records are written. And the larger story, the one about how a society defines justice at its most final edge, continues, still being written by every generation that confronts it.